It's when people stick fucking stickers on them and the vinyl wraps.
The thing is, they're just gonna wear away in your hands, and you're gonna be left with a sticky controller.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a sticky controller.
Nobody wants a sticky controller.
Hello Internet, I'm Richie and welcome to Sounds of Stadia SideQuest, a show where we take a step off the critical path and explore more of what the video game world has to offer. On this week's show, I'm joined by the host of the Sounds of Stadia podcast, Mr. Chris.
Hello, Stadios.
Still loving his breakfast cereal. And of course, the techie teacher himself, Mr. Tom.
This is an introduction.
Yes, that was an introduction. Very good introduction. And this week on the show, we're going to be talking about controllers and just going through some of the controls that we all have lying around and talking about the good points, the bad points, and coming up with our own consensus, each of us, and which one we prefer and which one we also think is the best. But first, a bit of housekeeping. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And you can get this show a whole 5 days early if you are a Patreon member. And hopefully by the time this comes out, a YouTube member. We have, we're just waiting for YouTube to approve all of that. Check out the Sounds of Stadia podcast. Comes out every single Monday. And our Thursday night live streams. And we may have actually finished Resident Evil by this point, actually.
I may have died from fear at this point.
It's hard to know because I'm currently in the past. But yeah, either way, we've got a couple of great Resident Evil streams up on the channel. You should check them out. They're fantastic. And a whole host of first looks, including a Kaze one by Tom and an East 8 one by me.
East 8?
Yeah. I remember which one I post first.
Me, yes, Dio.
Right, should we get into it?
Yeah, why not?
Let's. I don't know where you want to start, Richie. So we should be clear that this isn't like a definitive ranking. We're not shitting on your favorite controller. We're literally just going to discuss. Well, I mean, one or two of them probably deserve it.
If your favorite controller is emulated touchscreen, fuck off now.
That's a statement. But yeah, that's not even a controller. But the quirks and differences we're probably going to chat, because we realised when we recorded the podcast this week, that collectively between the three of us, we probably have almost every controller, mainstream controller known to man. So I don't know, where would you like to start? Do you want to go chronologically?
First of all, we're also not going to touch mouse and keyboard. That's a whole different argument, and I don't think any of us have the Xbox Series controller, so we're not going to be talking about that. I do intend to buy one since Design Labs is back up, but it's not there yet.
Okay.
So chronologically, I'm trying to think.
Now you've got to test yourself against the order of things.
What came first, the Nintendo 64 or the PlayStation? Actually, chronologically, you've got something earlier than the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation.
I do. Should we start with this little bad boy?
Should.
The iconic Nintendo Entertainment System controller by Nintendo.
It's a rectangle, everyone.
It's a rectangle with a handful of buttons.
Good thing my hands are shaped.
Like a rectangle.
Like a Tetris piece.
Is that from the NES Mini as well?
It is, yeah. It's not the original. Okay. If it was the original, it would be a lot more discoloured.
Right. True that.
Right off the bat, I need to say that is a great controller. Not because of what it is, because it's clearly not a great controller, but because of what that meant, what it represents. That controller saved the video game industry. People talk about Mario and Zelda, but that's the controller that plays on us.
That's very true. I'd be very interested to see what your thoughts are comparing. I've just noticed you like tapping the D-pad there, Chris, and what you actually think like in comparison to what we're going to talk about. Things like the button presses and the D-pad, like the structure of it and how it actually feels. And
the lack of D-pad.
The lack of D-pad. Yeah, sort of. I suppose it was a lack of D-pad on the.
It's not a D-pad. It's 4 buttons. Yeah. It even works as 4 separate buttons if you split it off. True. But we'll talk about the Switch in a bit. Mm-hmm. So, what do you think of the ergonomics, Chris?
Terrible. I mean, let's face it. Like, it's all, again, it's like smaller hands, maybe. But any kind of lengthy play, these corner points, they're not great. I've also just noticed the A and the B are the wrong way around. Like it's BA.
I think it's always been that way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I mean, is that Japanese because their books go?
They read from right to left. Yeah.
I never thought of that as the reason. I always thought it was just.
Sorry, what am I even talking
one you
about?
going to press?
No, they read from top to bottom if you go in traditional.
Yeah.
But they do read their books from back to front. You are correct.
Yeah. I remember seeing the first like Japanese a comic book in a shop and reading it and being like, this doesn't make sense. And then thinking it's all back to front, and then someone explains to you that it goes the other way.
You're the guy in the comic store reading the manga. It's like, this doesn't make sense, and the guy has to go, you're reading it the wrong way.
Why is the guy dead?
It's very much spoiler heavy from the get go. But I don't know what's more to really say about these. Obviously, the remake ones come with the Wii plug, which is such an odd choice rather than USB. They've gone with the Wii.
Yeah.
But, again, basic. What more can you want from it? It does its jump and its attack, and it's up and down, left and right.
It's a basic controller for a basic era of games, but in a very important one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose what you've got to remember with the older controller designs is that because manufacturing has come such a long way, that like the finicky details of being able to produce these en masse, we were never going to have the likes of ergonomic grips on an NES controller, were you really?
The thing is, even I've got some controllers on my desk in front of me where when I was handling them for the first time in years, it's like even controllers that were designed with ergonomics in mind aren't that comfortable now. But should we move on to the next controller, which I think is going to be I think it's going to be you again, Chris, for the next one.
Probably. Tom, you could do the introductions again. I'll just bring them in.
It's the Super Nintendo Entertainment System controller by Nintendo.
It isn't a bit of colour to this one.
There is.
Bit of curvature.
Oh.
And we should also point out as well,
shoulder buttons.
Again, this is another such important controller in video game history because it's got your 4 buttons, your 4 face buttons. That is the origins of the 4 face buttons right there.
Mm-hmm.
Which still exists to this day.
Absolutely. What's the order of the buttons going clockwise from top? What have we got on
going
there?
Blue X, red A, yellow B, green Y.
Okay, so we'll remember that when we come to the next generation, which I believe Richie may actually introduce. But let's stick with the Super Nintendo just for a minute. Then let's stick with that.
I mean, it's curved, so immediately my fingers can actually grip around it. The shoulder buttons, like I've got a natural gravitation to tap them, but I think that just gives such a different dynamic, right, for games going forward, having those extra buttons on the front, but actual shoulder buttons to do something that was like revolutionary in its own right. Just left and right.
It just means that more complicated games could be developed because you had more buttons to assign things to.
I'm just thinking back to Star Fox and just thinking, do a barrel roll.
Yep.
Of
course, color as well.
Yes.
That's distinct. Those distinct colors are kind of what Nintendo carried for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Star Fox and the distinct colors, we have this.
Hey, it's the Nintendo 64 controller by Nintendo.
It gets a lot of shit, but I used to love this controller. I thought it was great. Again, Nintendo crushing it in the controller things. First to have an analog stick.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's terrible. You can literally see it wobbling.
Oh, yeah, I remember that being a massive issue.
First to have Rumble.
Rumble.
Yeah, again,
we take Rumble pack right there.
We take vibration, obviously, for granted now. And like with the PS5 and all the haptic feedback, they're trying to take us to that next level. But back then, you bought it separately, right? It was like £30-40 for the Rumble pack just to have this crazy new sense of engagement with what you're controlling on screen, and it's crazy how much Nintendo kind of led the forefront on controller design.
And the first to have a button on the back, which are a lot of things like the Xbox Elite controller and other like third-party controllers now adapted when you get paddles and stuff.
The Z trigger.
The
trigger, man. The trigger was insane. Although I do recall having just memories about playing like Star Wars Pod Racer and GoldenEye and stuff. And as a child with tiny hands, you had to hold the controller in basically one quadrant. There was always a part of the controller which you just left unmanned, and what led them to make essentially a bear claw? I can't fathom.
The L button doesn't get used. I think the only game I can think of that used the L button was Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and it just hid your map. It's like, and
I definitely
a D-pad,
remember.
which I don't know whether it's because it never gets used or it's actually a decent D-pad, but the D-pad feels nice.
Just hold that up again, Richie. I'm just curious to think like how I'm thinking like looking at the colours,
evolution,
where stuff's moved around. So you've got like the colour ones have just kind of been scattered across the rest of the controller, and the yellow one has gone through a bit of osmosis where it's just changed into there's 4 little yellow ones now.
I do feel like the red button has migrated massively on the controller there.
Well, it's now start as well.
It's nice to see they kept the colour scheme in terms of like the grey controller with the coloured buttons still though. I always remember picking up the N64 controller for the first time and literally, like you said before, not having a single clue of how to actually hold the thing. Like, I'm pretty sure at one point I even held my middle hand, both my middle hands on the center and being like, feeling like it's like the hilt of a sword or something.
Well, I think it's one of them. It was confusing because it's the jump from 2D to 3D gaming. So you naturally hold it like that. That is probably the most comfortable way to hold it. But then you're using the D-pad, which no one uses. Yeah. So then you have to go to the analog stick, and then my hand doesn't fit very well into there. You can see how it's like pressing against the left.
Your man hands.
I suppose that was the idea of the N64 controller. Having the 3 prongs was so you could have it in the, with the D-pad setup, but then if you needed to move to the analog, then you would. But lo and behold, most of the games ended up having us move to that regardless. So you just ended up having, like you said, that redundant upper left third, essentially, really. Interesting side note on that Rumble Pack right there is I remember with my my Game Boy, I had similar to what you said before, Chris. I had Star Wars Racer on handheld, and that was that along with I think it was Pokemon Pinball had a separate compartment that you had to put a AA battery into the game itself because it had a rumble motor in there too. And I always remember that being just like absolute state-of-the-art technology.
Do you remember the pain when you're booting up a game and you decide whether you're going to go for your memory pack or your rumble pack? You want the rumble pack because you want the rumble, but then you want to be able to save your game, and sometimes if you pulled out your memory pack during game, you corrupt all the memory and lose all your saves.
Absolutely.
That was a thing.
We've now, I suppose, before we move on, we've got a baseline at this point then, gents, that you've both got experience of controllers right there with D-pads. Richie, you've got an analog stick. I mean, I can vividly remember the analog stick on the N64 controller. And Chris, you've got buttons, you've got the start buttons as well to obviously to reminisce on. Chris, I think you've got something from a different manufacturer altogether, though.
Yeah, right? I've got a Mega Drive kind of. Hey, it's one of the newer ones, but it's not. I do have the Faithful one, but it's up in the loft, and let's face it, it's a lot of effort to get down. But in terms of the design of the Mega Drive one, of course, it had that curved kind of more familiar shape that we're familiar with now. 3 buttons. If anyone out there was lucky enough to have the turbo controllers that had another row of 3 buttons,
never used.
I can't remember what game I had on the Sega Mega Drive or the Genesis, which was it was actually had a flick switch that changed the controller into turbo mode, and every time you press the buttons, it did it basically was a way of cheating, I think, and just your generic D-pad. But
I wish we had some Mad Catz controllers to bring onto this episode.
That's someone.
Do you think? Did turbo mode? Do you think it actually ever did anything?
If it was like a game where you're required to hit something multiple times,
like a fighting game where it's mashing it.
I can tell you for a fact that the only way I managed to get through a certain part of a game was through the use of the turbo controller. On the PS1, in fact, which we'll talk about next, Metal Gear Solid, the torture scene, the only way I actually managed to get through the torture scene in the end was through the use of that to mash the X button to survive. So should we move on to that then? Should we talk about the PlayStation controller, the original? Wow.
Isn't she
there
beautiful?
It is, folks. There it is.
It's so weird seeing it without the analog sticks, right?
Yes,
because the whole DualShock generation Like, because again, this was the original PlayStation 1.
Yeah, that's not a DualShock.
No, that's not DualShock, but very, very early on, they changed to the DualShocks. And I distinctly remember playing Ape Escape and having to use the sticks for the first time. And your camera angle was a child's brain trying to figure out the axis of where to go and how to kind of, because it wasn't inverted either. It was like traditional, like as we know them today.
Yeah.
But it does lend the conversation to thinking, imagine... Like, we all just take it for granted that we can pick up the sticks, and we've joked before when we give like our controllers to our other halves or people who've not into gaming.
Your parents.
And they immediately do that. Yeah, your parents, and they do that thing where they're all over the place with the controller.
We used to do as a kid.
But the axis, and we just kind of take it for granted. And Tom, you're probably going to be the litmus test for this one. But when you have your little baby comes along in the coming months, and they probably have some inclination to play games with you, hopefully.
I hope so.
I'm sure you're hoping on that. The introduction to, like, I'm absolutely in wonder of how that's going to look as we do the podcast. And like you, in like the years to come, maybe you talk about the first game you want to introduce them to, and see, like, would you start off with like a basic controller? Because like surely like something like that would be much easier to understand, because throwing them in at the deep end with something like Final Fantasy with full dual stick compatibility, all that might just kind of blow their minds a little bit.
Absolutely.
So there's going to have to be,
I think what you need to do, the first game your kid plays, you need to get a Game Boy Advance and Pokemon Fire Red.
Okay.
That's a good intro to gaming right there.
So the very first controller I'm actually thinking about going for is a little controller by Fisher Price. You may have seen these before.
I think my nephew might have one.
On
on
this bad boy right here, but super zoom in for you right there.
Super zoom,
just especially for you guys on this episode of SideQuest. But yeah, no, it's going to be a real adventure for me to try to figure out all of that logistically, try to cultivate that love for games in a way, I suppose, really. But I'd be very keen on hearing from other parents in the community as well as to what they would do or what their thoughts were for like introducing their kids to video games too, because I want to try to get it right, but at the same time, it's obviously however it happens, doesn't it really?
Yeah, because ours has been so natural. It's just the evolution of the games industry. It's whatever was brand new at the time was like, that's what you got. So my introduction to an analog stick was because that's what came with my PlayStation, whereas now you've got so much variety, and will your brain be able to comprehend analog sticks? Who knows?
While we're still on this, talking about Sony, I think it's very interesting, worth mentioning, the buttons layout. This is the DualShock 2. We might as well discuss straight after this.
Yeah, go for it.
The button layout is exactly the same as the Nintendo layout. It's us in the West who butchered it, where we used the X, and it's X, not cross. X as you confirm. Where actually circle in Japan is often used, where we would use like a check mark, a tick.
Yeah. We've all been in the menu screen, right? Yeah. And pressed X to start the game, and it boots back out to the opening title screen, and you're thinking, what's happened there? I've done that with so many Konami games in the past.
Absolutely.
Especially JRPGs, still even nowadays, still stick to it. But I think it has
your menus.
I think we're kind of winning this out. I know when I booted up, I think it might have been Ace. It's either Ace or Dragon Quest. I had the option to play it in default or like alternative like modes, and basically just switched them around.
Yeah. Well, PlayStation have buckled now. They've actually said going forward, PS5 generation, they will be using the Western layout as opposed to even in Japan, where they've traditionally altered their software for the Japanese audience. Now that's not a thing. They're not going to retrofit it for territories. It's just going to be PlayStation is cross enter X to enter.
You might get some games that still hold on to the traditional stuff, especially things. East could be an example of that, where it tends to come out earlier in Japan than it does like in the West, and we're talking about multiple years earlier.
Yeah.
But DualShock 2 analog sticks now the standard.
Am I right? Sorry, am I right in remembering with the DualShock 2 that you could activate the analog sticks? Like it wasn't by default, it had the button. Yeah.
And my fingers over the LED.
That's when you know it's broke, when you get an old DualShock 2. DualShock 2? Yeah, DualShock 2 is when you press the analog and the light doesn't come on, and then you realise, like, oh, crap, my controller's gone.
But you might guess by the name that DualShock 2 there was a DualShock 1, which was on the original PlayStation, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Literally, it's this, only grey.
For that one. And then where do we go from there? I guess straight on to the DualShock 3, which is just you just cut the cord.
I was going to say,
that's the literal difference. Just cut the cord.
You got rid of the analog button and put the PlayStation button.
Yeah, the first rendition of that, wasn't it, really? It was moving from wired to wireless as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, this one would have looked very different because we remember they had the boomerang control they showed off at E3 and it got that much shit.
Yeah.
They clearly went back to the drawing board and went, what have we got? And they went, we've still got loads of these chassis lying around. It was like, can we make it wireless in 6 months? Yes, do it. And I think that is why the entire PlayStation 3 era was just the DualShock 2 without a cord.
There was a 6-axis first.
Oh, yeah.
And then they got rid of that and brought in the DualShock 3.
6-axis, man.
Wow.
Oh, well, this actually is 6-axis as well.
All right.
Hey.
I think it was still a thing. I just think games implemented it.
Yeah, I think they added they re-engineered. Basically, they brought out the second generation, which was the DualShock. But since are we going to stick with Sony?
I was going to say which ones are the ones where we start getting color variants.
Well,
you definitely get them on the PS4 controller.
That's true. I was going to say, before we jump onto that, I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on, Chris, for you, your comparison between the button presses and Richie analog sticks. I mean, it's not really much a comparison.
I mean, analog stick-wise, like Richie said, having the two revolutionized the way you look around completely to a point where it's weird how we naturally pick them up and just imagine a world where they were swapped and you use the left stick to look up and around and the right stick to move.
Yeah.
We just take it for granted that the left is movement.
There probably was games in the early days of 3D first-person games.
See, I imagine that the actual layout of it, the left analog stick, because there's this whole idea, I don't know what science really says about it, but there's this whole idea that, the left controls the right part of the brain and the right controls the left part of the brain, whether it might have something to do with that cognitively, whether we use the right part of the brain for movement and determining things like that. I don't know.
It is so weird to think there's an alternate universe. Like how much if you inverted left and those two sticks, so that one was looking around and the right one was movement. I don't think our brains could cope with that. We're so conditioned now. I think I would have to turn the controller upside down and do it that way.
It's like in some early games, you're left analog stick. Well, if more for the Nintendo, the analog stick would be forward, backwards, and turn, rather than turn the camera. Where now we know it's forward, backwards, and strafe.
Yeah, it's even aiming down the sights. When GoldenEye used to have to hold an L1, I think, or L to lock in.
Used to have
it locks in the aim, and then you can move, but there's no free movement.
Yeah,
it's crazy how movement's just so simple now. We take it for granted how it's there and it exists.
We should mention Turok because I think Turok's a game that gets overlooked a lot in its place in video game history. But that's I think may have been the first, if not the first game to have what we now know as the forward, back, straight and strafe. I mean, it was on the C buttons, not the analog stick, but the analog stick was for aim. So the traditional, what we now see as standard first-person shooter control, I think it originated in Turok.
So what's your take on the evolution of analog sticks from the N64 to the...
I mean, that's hard plastic and wobbly as hell.
Yep.
These aren't bad. On the DualShock 2, they're actually quite comfortable.
Little nubbins.
The full concave. They're not the DualShock 4 where it's
we'll
concave
talk about this
and
next.
convex. But they actually feel quite good. I think if you put these analog sticks on a modern controller, maybe change out the tops a bit, you'd probably be okay. I don't think you'd have a lot of complaints.
Oh, before we move on to the DualShock 4 then, do you want to talk about the Xbox 360 controller? Because that would have been the same era. Yeah, it would have been the same era as the DualShock 3.
Yeah.
And then Chris,
can we do a shout out to Dreamcast? While we pass by it,
what's a Dreamcast?
I never had one, but I was always just fascinated the fact it had a little screen that you could pop out within it, which was just,
and you could play mini games on it.
Yeah, that's so much technology gone into a controller. It was unfortunately it was too early for its time. Rest in peace, Dreamcast.
I love that we give a shout out to Dreamcast, but not the Saturn.
Nah, the Saturn.
I never had a Saturn. My cousin had one, so I played one, but yeah.
The Saturn controller was very similar to the
I never had a Dreamcast
the Turbo Mega Drive controller, basically.
The Dreamcast, actually, I think might have been the first controller that had offset sticks, like the Xbox. This is the Xbox 360 controller.
I think you are correct.
I've never owned an Xbox in my life. This is a PC controller. But we should mention like things like the Duke from the Xbox line, but I don't think any of us had that. Did you, Tom?
No.
All right.
No, I didn't. It looked like a big boy, though.
This is one of the best controllers of all time.
Yeah.
It's ergonomic. It's got proper triggers, not just buttons to press on the shoulders.
It was spring-loaded controller triggers, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The buttons feel good. The analog sticks are good. I just think for a basic controller, if you just want a basic controller to play some PC games now, you can't go wrong with an Xbox 360 controller. You really can't.
Very compatible. At what point did we get the sticks that became a button unto themselves? Remember the first game that you push it in and remember that first time it said press R3 or L3 and you're like, what the
I think that was
might be the DualShock 2.
I think it might have been the 2. I definitely remember it on the 3.
It's definitely there on the 2.
Because just think, there was a moment where the controller suddenly had 2 more buttons that could be implemented. And like, if we look at like Call of Duty and stuff now, it's the default sprint button.
Yeah, and the default melee button as well. Usually. Yeah. You just take it for granted that you bash them in to punch and sprint, and yet there was a time when they didn't exist. It was just a stick. I don't know about the DualShock 1. Possible, but it definitely dates back to at least the DualShock 2.
Okay.
Crazy how they can just get more buttons in there.
I feel like it'd be nice to hear in the comments if anyone knows or wants to share with us their first experience of using an L3 or an R3 in a video game. Really,
where's L3?
Or even if you want to, or even if you want to, just hit us up with your knowledge of what the first game was that you were aware of that used L3 or R3.
Yeah. I definitely remember looking in the guide, because remember games came with like proper thick booklets back then, and when it said R3, I can't remember what game it was, but I do visibly remember looking at the PlayStation controller layout and going, but it's there, what does it mean, a button? And then you're like, oh, it clicks in, thinking you broke it, because they also pop out a little bit if you give them a little tug.
Do you remember when it also... Yeah, do you remember when it also, you first looked at the L3 or R3 and it showed the analog stick with L3 or R3 and a little arrow above it, and you're looking at the stick and going, down?
It doesn't do anything,
The thing is, between like PS2, N64 era and PS4, I was almost exclusively a PC player, so I remember occasionally I'd go around Chris's and we'd play like Call of Duty, and I'd accidentally just melee in the middle there because I wasn't used to like using the controller and like
running and then
and while the L3 and R3 are on the DualShock 2, I don't think they were extensively used.
Sadly not.
Yeah, that's why I'm interested in getting people's thoughts on where they first remember it, because wow, that's something that we could have easily looked by, isn't it? Really. So from the Xbox 360, I mean, we've got to give a shout out to Nintendo as well for what sort of butchery they went through. I mean, Chris, you may have something to share with us. That thing, that telephone, that cellular device.
TV remote.
Yeah.
TV remote.
We should give a shout out to the GameCube controller as well, because it's still used extensively in like the things like the Smash scene. So
the GameCube controller as well was they moved away from the C buttons being the yellow pressing buttons and moved to a stick for that as well, didn't they?
Yeah, they realized the second stick is necessary. And was it the massive A button and tiny B button? They changed
the layout of the buttons, and they made the X and Y those weird like semicircle buttons as well.
Oh, we never mentioned that. You added the two. You got two sets of shoulder buttons, but you didn't on the GameCube controller. You only had your triggers and Z.
Triggers and Z. That's right. Yeah. Oh, it's so crazy. The GameCube one is one of those where it keeps living on because of the Smash community.
Yeah,
there's a lot of purists who only play Smash with a GameCube controller, and I believe the latest one still has functionality to use the GameCube controller.
I'm sure didn't they bring out GameCube controller for the Switch?
They did. Yeah, game layout controller.
Well, I
Which
think
is
it's
crazy
just one of
to
them.
think how old that controls from the 2001.
Yeah, I think it's like the Xbox 360 controller. I think they just nailed it. They nailed the controller design. It felt good to play. It worked.
Except for the fact that it required batteries.
Well, so did this. I mean, this is actually just a power pack because I have a charging stand.
Yeah.
That is one of my biggest gripes with the whole battery thing.
This has been retired. This is retired now, though.
Yeah.
Like, I'm expecting that one day that you open these up and they've like just actually...
They've just corroded and...
I mean, these ones have. These ones have.
Yeah, I was going to say, you probably shouldn't don't store your controllers with batteries in them for long term.
I won't play this anytime again.
I'm talking the people watching.
But we shout to the nunchucks though, like a stupid form factor, like the fact that you actually we joked earlier on about the rectangle, but remember some Mario games you played with this on its side.
Yeah.
So actually, they've gone back over to the form factor. But I couldn't imagine, like, that must get so frustrating. The trigger's getting in the way of my finger. I've got a battery pack clip catching me here. Even though everyone had these with a big stupid rubber case on them, just in case they flung it at the granny while playing Wii tennis.
You always had that thing where it told you to put the strap on your wrist. But
the nunchucks and stuff. God, that was a time, guys.
We've got to say, you've got to say from that point in Nintendo's history that, yes, okay, they took a huge gamble by moving to the Wii controller and away from, yes, I know we had, other designs of controllers they released that you could use and so on, but it was still, a massive success.
They're built,
an unreal success.
Over 100 million, right?
They built they built an entire console around the concept of motion controls being, the next big thing. And for a while, the Wii was awesome. It did what they wanted to do.
I mean, the rest of them looked to them to copy, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but...
I mean... that could have gone so many different ways then. I remember playing Twilight Princess and using the having to slash the stick to the one to actually attack as well with it. Or using, when you use lock-on targeting and using the nunchuck to dodge left and right as well.
I never knew the balls on the end of the PlayStation Move controller was soft. I thought they were hard.
No, they're squishy.
I never knew that.
Squishy, and they've got little... I've turned it on now. I've actually turned my... Because, actually, that's the weird thing. Is this aside from the GameCube controller, this is probably the only peripheral that's still used on today's tech. This works on a PS5 with VR. Yeah. It's actually a main component of PSVR.
They're also massively in demand as well for the VR.
If we're talking current generation of consoles, then it is, I think, the only controller we've talked about that is still usable. And even the DualShock 4, I don't think is usable on the PS5.
That seems bizarre to me because I'm pretty sure you tested the PS5 controller on the PS4 and it worked, didn't you? Or even the PS3, wasn't it, Chris?
The PS5 worked on the PS3, but not PS4.
Yeah.
Whereas this bad boy, this wand, works on everything. I've turned it on now.
This is when you start getting into gimmicky territory.
Yes.
As much as I love this controller and I think is a fantastic controller, the touchpad is it was used in about 4 games and never touched again.
I actually, because I'm a big MMO player and I played Final Fantasy 14 on PC and on PS4. The touchpad was a weird thing because you could actually bring up the cursor in the console game and scroll around and use it as a mouse in the game. It
was a cool idea, but we're at the point where most third-party games are going to be developed for both Xbox and PlayStation simultaneously, so they're not going to add extra features in for one controller that the other controller doesn't have. Because the Xbox One controller is basically this again. Better, but basically this again. I wouldn't say unfortunately.
I have some bad news. My my PlayStation 4 finally died the other day. It finally gave out. It no longer works. It was a day one PS4. I've never replaced it. It served me well, but my controller no longer connects and it no longer works at all. So, rip PlayStation 4.
Well, you might be able to pick up a bargain one, as people are selling them to make generate funds for the PS5.
True that. But why would I spend that money when I could save up for a PS5, right?
True.
Should I ever be able to actually get one?
Exactly.
Stock.
There's, I'd say shout out, but we probably shouldn't acknowledge the atrocity that is the Wii U controller.
Let's just move on.
It's just like some of the. I've got a list up now just on Wikipedia, and like I'm looking at it thinking, if you showed me a picture of this now and said it was a concept design, I'd be like, yeah, it is, because I don't think I've ever seen that in real person.
They took this idea and put it in the home console, and then it just didn't work. But then they also branded it absolutely terribly. The Wii U, I think most people thought it was just Wii U, the next Wii, where it was basically a completely different console with a completely different concept.
Yeah. I don't think anyone would know what the console aspect of the Wii U looked like. Like the actual box was just a little white rectangle, right? Like a DVD player. And I guarantee if you showed picture like the photos to people, they'd be like, I've never seen that before in my life.
Yeah, we're gonna have to pick
up.
And then
there was a pro. Well. Yeah, there's a pro controller as well, Richie.
Yeah.
For the Wii U, which I don't recall ever seeing ever.
No.
Which has got the two sticks at the top right of the controller. Like where like traditionally you've got. I'm trying to think. How
so it's like this, only that the second analog stick is there.
So your thumbs would have to be like so. That's weird. Anyway, moving on.
Right. What should we go with next? We've talked a bit about the jokes. Top 4. Should we go with Sense?
I mean, we can do while we're bearing this in mind, moving to the next stage then, because I also want to talk about the Switch controllers in just a moment. PS4's trying to boot up but failing.
Oh, it was yours. I thought that was mine again, and I was like, I've just turned you off.
It's trying to boot up but it's failing. I want to think about the weight of the controller as well and the distribution of weight, because we're in the territory now where I think this is where controllers started to become more robust, more...
This is much heavier than this.
Yes, absolutely. And also I could hear that one rattling when you were moving it around, Richie.
The batteries.
Yeah.
There's something snapped off. There's a spring in there somewhere.
Yeah, something's... I don't know what that is, but... I mean, the controller works.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't have an Xbox One controller lying around, so I don't know if you want to talk about...
I don't have much experience.
I've got one of my custom labs, which I got for Game Pass and stuff. Again, better form factor for adult hands, I would say. It does have a little bit more sharpness to the kind of cornering around the top, but again, concaved triggers, a little bit of a softer press to them. Click on the R buttons, on the L ones.
No battery pack getting in your way.
No, it's a nice, smooth, flush battery pack.
I mean, this is a third party battery pack, but that's like shows you where that is. Yeah. Like,
which is still crazy that it's still just battery. Yeah. Obviously offset sticks, but no, it looks great, feels great. It's traditional layout. No touchpad button, but they just have a button for that. So it's all. I suppose we're reaching the era where they're all very much standardized. Like we've not mentioned the Switch Pro controller, but like the Switch Pro controller is essentially just the same, right?
Yeah,
pretty much.
That's the Nintendo layout. The basic Nintendo layout, all the way back to the SNES with analog sticks.
Yeah, softer buttons.
And barring the touchpad, no difference.
Yeah, looks actually exactly the same as the Amazon Luna controller.
I was just about to make that comparison.
Like if that had like an Amazon purple circle around that, it would just be the same.
Stadia control. That's the layout. Now you occasionally get a few additional buttons, but I think we've settled on the layout.
And I'm happy with it. I don't need change in my life now.
It works. Yeah.
So does that bring us on to the bad boy that we have? What are we missing?
Should we'll talk Switch first.
We'll talk the Switch. We'll talk the Switch because of the versatility of it, I think.
Yeah. So I don't have a Pro controller.
Let's take a controller and break it in half and give it to a hand each.
Yeah. Well, so I've got the Joy-Con grip here.
It's an improvement on what the Wii U wanted to be, really, because the Wii U was just too bricky. It was too much in your face. Whereas
you can have it like this.
There's this. Like this. I can work out in my living room.
But I'm one who I don't have a Pro controller for my Switch because I saw my Switch as a replacement for my 3DS.
Right.
And I almost exclusively play it in handheld mode. So the Joy-Cons are either side of it.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I have like a third party wired controller for Smash I bought, but that was just so I didn't destroy my Joy-Cons.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's forward thinking.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously the Joy-Cons are essentially the kind of everything about rumble and motion and gyroscopes and 6-axis all blurred into one, because there's games that you have on Nintendo Switch where like you can hear ice cubes inside. They've got speakers, which then PlayStation did with like their Astro Bot DualSense stuff, and Nintendo always elevating and just thinking outside the box with like, whether it's used that often, it's a different matter. They definitely always try and push it to something different and weird.
I get why they went with the face button, second set of face buttons rather than a proper D-pad for this controller, because it's designed so you can just pop it off, two people playing different things. It's got this console's got the kickstand. We've all seen the trailers.
Yeah.
But I think that is the biggest letdown of this controller isn't a proper D-pad. Especially considering how well indies have done on the platform. I think this is why with the Switch Lite you do get a proper D-pad.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Right, should we talk about this one?
Yeah.
We've got two controllers I think we need to cover.
Okay, yeah.
Which one do you want to go with first?
Next one.
I think if we go with we'll go with the DualSense, the difference, and then we'll summarize up with our Stadia controller thoughts. Yeah.
It's by far it's the heaviest controller. The adaptive triggers are awesome. Although there is one game, if you're going to play it, turn them off straight away, and that is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. Adaptive triggers screws you up in that game.
It's Richie's personal gripe right there.
It's the only time I found them like not beneficial, actually detrimental to the game experience, because your reverts that you need to get your combos going are on the triggers, but that extra bit of resistance is just gets in the way. You want a nice
slows you down a bit.
You want a nice clean press.
Yeah, no, I'd echo that with there's a few games I've played where you require like fast archery and they slow it down for the drawback of the string. But when I'm trying to like just go bang it like Legolas style, pop, the resistance is a little bit frustrating at times because I'm just so used to like, well, actually, I just want to fire loads of arrows. I don't want to have to go draw, fire, draw. You do lose those precious seconds, and when you're quickly aiming around, there are certain things where it's more of a hindrance than it is enjoyable. Yeah. Whereas on the flip side, like the Astrobot game, which is the kind of tech demo for the controller, phenomenal. The way it utilizes everything we've just praised Nintendo for there. It just showcases everything that controller can do. It does lead me to worry a little bit about the life expectancy of them, though, because obviously all that pushback you're getting on the resistance and such, it's going to implement it's going to impact the lifespan of how much mechanics are going on.
They will definitely have stress tested it to hell. But
I just think at one point it will surely give out.
Yeah.
Beyond the adaptive triggers and the better rumble, it's basically the DualShock 4, but it is actually noticeably heavier. It's still got your touch bar. It's still got your LEDs around it. But I don't think it's very comfortable.
Yeah, I'd probably say that. There's a few times I mentioned it on the podcast a few weeks back that I've actually felt. Yeah, there's my fingers or hands have ached a little bit. Yeah, and I don't know whether that's just adapting to it.
There,
or you're totally right. There's little edges.
You might be able to see on camera. There's a little lip.
Yeah,
and you can feel that when you're holding the controller.
Yeah, and that's probably what's making my fingers hurt, because in theory you're pressing into the palm of your hand.
Yeah.
For arguably hours at a time, and when you're gripping it, anyone who's done any DIY all day, when you're hammering all day, you're sawing all day, and all of a sudden you realise that your grip's impacted by like manual labour, just going about that. And and then going back to the DualShock 4, I was playing It Takes Two this past week. It's smoother. There is something about the DualShock 4 which I actually think leads us on to probably our next point, gentlemen, about why this controller is so bloody good.
Yes.
And I honestly think it's so understated. The fact it's smooth.
It's comfortable.
I remember
well.
when it first came out that people were saying it was a cheap piece of shit, but I'd completely disagree with that statement.
The buttons feel nice.
Yeah.
I'm not fond of the triggers. I like a bit more resistance in the triggers. These are very, very soft.
Flappy.
And I think they got activate a bit too quickly, because I know before occasionally I've been playing games where if I'm resting my fingers on quite heavy, I've accidentally pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
So I'd like better triggers on the next generation one, but
there've been several times when I've been playing Destiny 2 where I've been walking around with my fingers on the triggers.
Yeah.
And I've just kept like zoom. Yeah.
But this is the most comfortable controller I've ever used.
Wow.
And having all these controls in front of me and picking them up I still think this is the most I haven't handled an Xbox Series X controller, so I can't comment there, but it's just like
I just want to be clear to people out there as well that we're not coming at this from an area of bias, by the way. We are literally trying to look at these holistically.
This is a fantastic controller. In fact, I'd say of all the controllers we've talked about today, this is the best controller. This is my favorite controller.
Yeah, there's definitely different elements.
Is levels above this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Richie. Like Tom was saying there about the zoom in and the sensitivity and stuff. There's work needs to be done on that because the lack of resistance is embarrassing compared to the DualSense. It doesn't give any sense of kind of like control over what you're trying to do, which is shoot an arrow, pull a trigger on a gun or something. There is something we said again about like the cheapness of the clicks as well.
Yeah.
Like it's satisfying on the D-pad, but I tell you what, trying to play this next to your partner makes one hell of a racket. These buttons, sorry, audio listeners. Clicky buttons are one thing for that kind of sense of I'm doing something.
Yeah.
But for long sessions of play, I mean, anyone who listens to us on stream, you're getting that noise, and it's like I don't know whether that's good or a bad thing.
It's nice to play. It's annoying when you're not playing. But I almost think this is the natural evolution of this. The Xbox 360 controller. It's a basic controller. It doesn't have any real bells and whistles apart from this was wireless.
Yeah,
but they're basically the same thing. But this is
when you look at
lighter.
It's essentially the layout. Oh yeah, it's the layout as well, though, isn't it? Like how they've merged the DualSense into an Xbox. They've kind of like bang, and then you get the child born in the cloud from it all. Obviously, color-wise, we don't have much variety right now.
I'm surprised by that. Both the DualShock 4 and the Stadia controller are lighter than the Xbox 360 controller. And I know I have a third-party battery pack in, but you'd have to have batteries in anyway.
Yep.
And these have batteries in it.
I'm trying to get a comparison between the weighting between this. The DualShock 4 is
dropped.
No,
broken.
I think the DualShock 4 is marginally lighter. Yeah, it feels lighter to me.
Now we're just weighing controls.
Now we're just
we're just going to sit here for a half an hour.
DualSense is the heaviest I've got in front of me. The
hollowness of the DualSense 3, there's nothing in this. This is just a plastic shell.
All right.
Yeah.
It's almost like a toy one you would find in a kid's. It's crazy how like empty this is for what it does.
Should we wrap this up then?
It's been quite a long one in the end, hasn't it?
Yeah. You know what's annoying though is on the I know it's only Wikipedia, but the list of controllers, the Stadia one doesn't feature on here, gentlemen.
Should it's a solid controller.
Should we go and edit it? The bloody Steam controller's on there.
Yeah, that document needs editing for certain.
There's a PlayStation
we need to forget
mouse.
the Steam controller ever existed with its weird massive circle thing.
How do we edit Wikipedia?
Right. Anyway, what I want from you both is. What is, of all the controllers we've talked about, and any others that you want to throw in there, do you think is the best controller, and what is your favourite controller? It could be the same thing.
Ah, dear. My best controller, I would have to go with... I personally, I really have a soft spot for the DualShock 4. I think it feels comfortable to hold. It feels like everything just rests nicely.
Yeah.
But I do just think that touchpad is a little bit of redundant space. Like it could be used for something else instead. But the DualShock 4 just feels overall good.
I'm with you. I think a year ago, it probably would have won for both categories for me.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think it's fallen behind a little bit.
My favorite controller, though, by far, like that's the best for me. My favorite has to be the Stadia controller. And again, I'm not saying that from a place of bias, but the clicking doesn't bother me. The triggers is probably the only letdown for me on this controller. It just feels comfortable. It feels well weighted. Everything feels nice to touch. So it just feels like overall, holistically, a better gaming experience to me. And my hand just sits nicely on it.
I think because the ergonomics are so good. For long play sessions, it feels nice to play. You don't get that feel like achy sensation when after long plays. I think it's weighted well. It's not so light that you feel like you're worried that it's just going to collapse, but it's not so heavy again for long play sessions that you get fed up of holding it. Chris?
Technically, I think the DualSense, hands down. I don't think there's like the technology in that is obviously it's the newest one. So, and with the legacy of controller design to boot as well, to put everything they've known into it. Ergonomically, no. I think like what you alluded to, Richie. I think it does literally cuts corners a little bit with its design, which from the hours I've played, it has hindered me a little bit. The Stadia one, I love the pieces. It is everything you've said there, super smooth ergonomically. The clicks, the buttons could maybe be worked on a little bit for a second iteration. And I'd love to see more colours come out. But I think, similar to what Tom was saying, for me personally, I think just the DualSense 4 is just perfect in every way for a game controller. The triggers are concave perfectly. The touch, I actually like the touchpad. I don't use it that much, but I just like the fact it's got a big sensitive button.
I like it conceptually. I just think it's underused.
Yeah, and just, I don't know, I've probably played more hours with this than any other controller in existence, so I'm probably also swayed a little bit by that. You can get them in every single colour. Tommy, you've got a bright pink one. I've had so many colour varieties, so there's a fun element that comes into
black
it.
One.
Yeah, I also love where I haven't got it. It's right here.
That's the first generation of the controller. That's the second generation of the controller, because that has the light bar on the front as well.
Yeah, I just think they're fun and they're light, and like again, for everyone you see online who says like they've broken and fell apart and stuff, mine have survived and lasted me without any wear or tear. I just think they're great. So my favorite will be the DualSense 4.
The DualShock
I think
4.
What did I say?
DualSense,
yeah. But the best one I think technically is the DualSense, but that's not always the favorite.
No,
but we'll see. Maybe it's when I put hundreds of hours into the ones. But yeah, good shout out to the Stadia one. Definitely, I'd love to see a Mark II
it ranks
iteration. For a new controller that isn't in many people's hands. I think it'll surprise a lot of people too. But guess let us know what they think.
Well, thank you very much for watching. That's all we have for you this week. This extended edition of SideQuest.
How long have we ran?
This is just controller porn. That's what this show was today. Not like that.
How long have we run for?
It's like 52 minutes or something.
Ooh, okay. Wow.
Make sure you like the video. Check out all of our other stuff. I'm not going to drag out this ending. I've been Richie.
I've been Tom.
I've been Chris.
Thank you very much for watching. Quest completed.